Hey, it's Greg here with MaritimeGardening.com. I'm going to do another Q&A video. I do these every 2 weeks. I try to choose 6 questions from the viewers over the course of the week that I think required some sort of elaborate answer. And this week, what do we got here? We got a question about worm castings, a question about mulching, a question about hoop houses and how to keep the temperature under control, a comment about the use of seaweed, question about the toxicity of Chinese garlic, and a question about deer and flowers and stuff like that. How to keep the deer out of your flowers. A quick update before we go. I haven't been doing a lot of videos lately because it's just been so rainy. This has been the most rainy, dreary, overcast April I've seen in years. There's just no sun, and but more importantly, there's still lots to do out in the garden, but I can't film it because it's just so humid, and it's not just rainy, but like high humidity, fog, mist, that sort of thing. And that sort of stuff is just not good for camera gear. You'd have to have a more expensive camera that can handle those sort of conditions. I don't have that kind of camera. We run a tight ship here at MaritimeGardening.com. So I haven't been able to film anything outside. And I also just haven't been doing much, to tell you the truth. It's just been last weekend. So on May 20th, I was out there. I was trying to build a hugelkultur bed. And I was working in an area of the garden that was basically uncovered for the majority of the winter because I was mid-process of redesigning a portion of my garden. If you've been watching all my videos, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I got down about 6 inches in the soil. Ice. Couldn't get through it. So still a lot of thawing out to happen in my garden. Now, I'm getting a little bit off topic here. But someone asked me a question a little while ago about when to plant things and what sort of natural signs I look to inform that. And that's a whole nother video, and I'm not going to get into it here in general. But as a general rule of thumb, and this phenomenon may not occur where you live, and it's something I'm working on, and I don't want to get into it too deeply, but where I live, in the spring, there's a point in the spring where these little tiny frogs start singing at night. They make a sound like, they start doing that. And for me, that's when you can plant your cold hardy things in terms of direct seeding them in the soil without any sort of micro. I mean, if you're using domes and stuff like that, that's a whole other thing. But if you're just planting stuff in the soil when the soil's thawed, once you hear the spring peepers, the cold hardy plants, spinach and stuff like that, if you put the seeds in the ground, that's when they're probably going to be able to germinate. The conditions are going to be right. Those two things seem to be timed. It's a whole other topic, and it's a wonderful topic, and I have one of my regular viewers ask me to talk about it, and I will do a video on that. I don't want to get into it here because it just requires a whole video. Okay, so anyway, let's get into these questions here. So the first question is from Dare Sensei, and the question is, it was a comment, actually an instruction. The next time you plant kale, plant it with worm castings and see if you notice any difference in the amount of pest issues you have with it. The castings contain chitinase that the plants can absorb. Chitinase dissolves chitin, which is a component in the exoskeletons of pests. When the pests eat the plant, their stomachs dissolve and they die. Actually, there was a question mark. And they die? So that's the instructions. So I get a lot of, to me, and I don't mean to offend the person that gave me this advice. I'm sure they were saying this from the best of intentions, but I read a lot of comments and questions that people give me about the magical properties of worm castings. And honestly, I think there's people out there trying to sell worm castings, and they're attaching magical properties to worm castings so that people will buy them. All of my gardens are covered in a mulch. All of the time, in all of my gardens, the worms, and there's worms everywhere in my garden. Anywhere you want, you move it. I got a goldfish pond. I was out there in the backyards with the kids on the weekend, and we said, hey, let's get some worms and throw them in the pond and watch the goldfish kill them, right? So to get worms in my garden, all you do is move the mulch back and look, and in 2 seconds you'll find worms. There are worms everywhere in my garden, at the very top layer of the soil where all my plants, are putting their roots down into. And those worms are perpetually putting worm castings everywhere, right? Every time it rains, all those castings get worked into the soil everywhere. So all of my plants are taking up whatever is in worm castings all the time, and they're full of it. And it doesn't affect my pests at all. So wherever you read this information, I think you were speaking to a snake oil salesman of some kind, or you're reading the writings of a snake oil salesperson. And you should, if you're reading a website where they're saying something like that, if there's a place on their website you can click to buy worm castings, I think you know the authenticity of the information you're getting. So anyway, maybe it does help with pests. It doesn't help with slugs, flea beetles, or whitefly, I can tell you that. Okay. All right, thanks. I didn't mean that as a rant. I'm just, it's more like, I get bothered, and I'm not blaming this person here. I get bothered by the people that sell these things as some sort of great solution to stuff. Generally speaking, I don't know why anybody would buy worm castings. If your soil is healthy, if you're giving the soil what it needs, you're going to have worms in your soil, and they are going to make worm castings. You shouldn't have to buy it. You shouldn't have to put it on the soil. The worms should be doing all the work and doing that for you. As long as all you got to do is facilitate that, and it'll take care of itself. All right. Next question. Donna Doucette. How do you incorporate the mulch and fertilizer if you do not till? That's a perfect question to follow up from the last one, because the answer is, how do I don't incorporate it. The worms incorporate it. The worms and other, when I say worms, it's just shorthand for all of the living things and microorganisms in my soil. The worms do the bulk of the work because they're big and they move around a lot. But look, you got your, hope this doesn't mess up my mic. Let me draw a little picture here. You got the soil level, and then you got the mulch on top. All right, so you got my visual here. You got this line here is where the mulch meets the soil, okay? So you got your mulch sitting on top of the soil, and then you got soil where all your worms live in the soil, right? And the worms are perpetually coming up from the soil, and they're hanging around that line where the mulch meets the soil, and they're working on the layer of mulch that's decomposing, that's in contact with the soil. And then they go down in the soil, and then they come back up, and then they go down and they come back up, and they have they do a little bit of mating on a nice warm night, and they go back down and come back up, and they go back down and they come back up, right? And there's all kinds of other things in your soil doing similar stuff like that with your mulch, and they're going down and they're coming back up. And that's how it's getting incorporated, and you don't have to do nothing, right? And while they're doing all that, they're making all these little tiny tunnels so that when it rains, instead of the rain running off your soil, the rain goes in the soil where you want it, right? So that's how, right? You don't have to do it. I don't. The answer is I don't incorporate it because I've got a whole bunch of partners, right? Beneficials. They're doing all of that. I don't need to. All right. So it solves itself. Next question is from Mickey McCurgeon. Mickey Mercudgeon. Mickey Mercudgeon. Mickey gives me a lot of good comments and questions. He says, at what temperature under the dome or plastic cover, he's talking about the plastic domes, different kinds of microclimates I use in my garden, or whatever, would start to worry about it getting too hot for seedlings or seeds. Mine got to 45 Celsius. It's 110 Fahrenheit. He was nice enough to give me both. When it was 10 degrees Celsius or 50 degrees Fahrenheit outside, and his dome was 43 Celsius or 110 Fahrenheit inside. He says, even when I vented it with flower pots under the ends and up the center of the sheet of plastic, it was still that hot. There was lots of moisture inside, And that was made apparent by all the steam and water droplets running inside the plastic. So, you know, wherever you are, what was it? The main question was, when do you start to worry about it? Well, when it seems to be too hot. I mean, you got to know your microclimate and where you are and how hot it gets and how sunny it is, and you're gonna have to vent it, of course. If you've got a dome that's, you know, it's a question of where's the heat, right? So if you got the ground here and you've got your dome, that circly thing is the dome, right? If all the heat's near the top of the dome, that's not such a big deal. I mean, it's a question of how hot is the soil getting? Yeah, is the soil drying out, right? And how much heat can that plant take? So it's a difficult question to answer because it depends on some plants love heat and they'll take a ridiculous amount of heat. Some plants don't, right? How much heat can that plant take? How much heat is being worked into the soil, right? I mean, if you have a plant indoors on a heating pad under lights, right, the soil is going to be like 30 degrees Celsius, right? So you know that the plant can take a soil at a temperature like that. So when you're outside, even though it might be really hot inside the dome, how hot is the soil getting? Is the soil drying out? What do the plants look like? I mean, look at the plants. They'll tell you a lot. If they're kind of like, oh, you know, if they look like they've kind of had it, if they're going to, you know, that sort of thing, it's probably too hot, right? So, I mean, you have to keep an eye on things. If you're a person like me who has to go to work all day, it's different if you're home all day and you can just sort of keep an eye on things and pop out there every once in a while, if you're retired or what have you. But if you got to go work all day and you know it's going to be a nice, you know, warm sunny day and you're concerned about it, you either got to vent a little bit or just take the thing right off, and that sort of thing. For me, that has not been an issue at all because this has been the darkest, dreariest, most unproductive April I think I've ever seen at all. It's just about time for me to do another garden tour, and you're going to be amazed at how little has happened in my garden because we just haven't had any sun. I mean, it's further along than it was a month ago, but not like remarkably so. It's not like it's not going to be like this big reveal. Wow, look at the life, you know, because it's just been so dark here. But I know everywhere isn't like here, so yeah, if you're getting lots of sun, you know, on a day like that where it's, you know, 10 degrees outside, that's a sort of, for people that aren't used to these sorts of temperatures, you wouldn't walk outside with a t-shirt on and jeans on 10 degrees. You'd want to wear a jacket sort of thing, right? But it's not freezing cold. You could, on a 10-degree day, some people might want to cover their ears and some people might not. It depends on the person, I guess. I mean, on 10 degrees, if there was no sun, I think I'd probably I'd cover a hood or something like that. If it was 10 degrees and it was a sunny day, I probably could wear a ball cap. Anyway, I'm getting off topic here. So yeah, I mean, I'm not giving the best answer in the world, but it really depends on what you're growing, what's going on in that dome, how everything's responding to it, how hot is the soil getting, how much heat can that plant take, is the soil drying out, what kind of day is it, how many days have been like that, right? Some plants can take like intense heat for a certain number of days and then they'll bolt or fail or whatever. So how long has it been like that? Is it a short amount of time? Or, you know, so we might have the odd day here where it gets that hot. And I don't do anything with my domes because I'm like, I know there's going to be no sun for the rest of the week. So I'm like, okay, let's go, you know. But if you're getting day after day after day after day like that, that might be too much for the plant. So you just have to use your judgment. Depends on what you're growing and then the trial and error and that sort of stuff. I hope that's helpful. There's no perfect equation. You really have to fine tune it to what you're growing and use your own judgment and watch the plants. I mean, the plants will tell you if they've had enough, right? Generally speaking, they like heat, but there's too much is too much as well. And depends on what you're growing. Some things like the really cold loving plants like spinach, they don't like heat as much as other things like kale, right? I mean, think about the plant you're growing. Is it something they grow in the deep south? Like if they grow in Florida, right? Something that loves heat and can take all the heat you can throw at it. Is it something they grow in a place like Italy, right? Which is much hotter than Canada where I live. So like a kale, kale will take a ridiculous amount of heat. Spinach, not so much, right? So anyway, I hope that helps. Next question is from Christian Berger. He says, please be aware that washed up dead seaweed provides an important food source and ecosystem for insect life on the foreshore. Shore. When you collect, please leave some seaweed for these organisms. And I'm going to assume this is from the best of intentions and is not just some sort of holier than thou high horse type comment, which tends to happen a lot. But that is good advice. And if you see me getting seaweed, I'm not trying to usher droves of people down to the seashore to get seaweed. That being said, I really don't know how a handful of you got to remember that collecting seaweed is heavy, hard work. It's dirty work. If you have a car, it's much more difficult than you have a truck. It's physical work. You have to find a stretch of shore that you can actually access, because most of the shore is like somebody's land. So you can't just go to the shore just anywhere. There's only a handful of places you can actually go and walk down to the shore with a bucket and fill it up with stuff, right? There's only so many pieces of the shoreline that fall into that category, or that are within a reasonable distance to where you park, right? There's lots of shore that you can walk to here in Nova Scotia, but you have to walk so far from a vehicle that you'd only carry a couple buckets back, you'd be exhausted. There's only a handful of places that you can have your vehicle maybe 10, 20 yards from the beach sort of thing. Even that is a good walk if you're carrying like a 50-pound bucket of seaweed. So number one, there's only a handful of locations where you can actually do this thing. So in terms of leaving some seaweed for this organism, the shoreline's pretty big. The ocean's pretty big and the shoreline's pretty big. So it would be a pretty extraordinary event for the entire shoreline to be stripped of seaweed. And by the way, the very next tide there'll be more on the shore, but there's just no way. That's number one. It's just, you can't access all the, basically, if every gardener in Nova Scotia decided tomorrow to try to go get seaweed, there's only a handful of places they could actually get to where it was logistically possible to get seaweed. And then the other 95% of the shoreline would be untouched, right? That's number one. Number two, it's hard. It's physically hard work to do. So of all the people that garden that might use seaweed, and they would be vegetable gardeners, only a fraction of them would have the physical sort of wherewithal to even want to do something like this. Number three, it's dirty. It's dirty work. And sometimes the seaweed has all these little dirty little, like little bugs and stuff in it. So most people wouldn't want it in the trunk of their car. So there are people with cars, they're out, which is just about everybody here. This isn't like Texas where everyone has a pickup truck. So there's a lot of people that just wouldn't do it because they wouldn't want to put something dirty like that in their car, right? Number four, I can make 1,000 videos on how there's no salt in seaweed. There's going to be half of gardeners will still not believe me. They're just not going to get it because they don't believe it'll work, right? So where am I going with all of this? I don't think the organisms in the shore ecosystem that depend on seaweed are at any risk of a handful of gardeners taking a little bit of seaweed from that shoreline. I really don't think it's a risk. But even that being said, I really don't think your typical gardener tends to be a nature lover type. And you go down to the beach, you see birds picking around in the seaweed because there's tons of little, what are they called? There's a name for it. It's just like sand fleas is what we call them, and that's not the technical term, but they're like little flea-looking things. So you see lots of little birds pecking around. You know that the ecosystem there depends on the seaweed. You're not going to take everything, but even if you wanted to take everything, you can't because it's exhausting, hard physical work. Normally when I gather seaweed, when I used to have a pickup truck and I go down and get about 6 buckets of it, I get the 6 buckets on my truck, and then I get home and like have lunch, and then I get the 6 buckets down to the garden. That's pretty much it for the day, right? And I'm in reasonably good shape. So I hope that answers the question. Next question. What about the toxicity of Chinese garlic? How does that affect the new bulbs? So this is an interesting question because I did a video, I got a number of answers to this question. I did a video, in the fall of 2017, where as an experiment I planted Chinese, I bought some at the cheap Chinese, you can get like 4 heads for $1 at the grocery store. And I planted some in the ground, and just to see if they grow. And I'll say number one, the following spring, when they did grow, but they looked really unhealthy. They just didn't look right to me. And I became very concerned that they had something like in them, some pathogen or whatever. And maybe they would have been fine, I don't know. But I went into that garden, I dug them all up and I threw them all out. I just got worried about getting like white rot in my soil or whatever. Number one, or maybe it's just the case that they just didn't look strong and healthy like my other garlics. It's very possible that they just cannot take a Canadian winter or the kind of damp, wet winter I have here. Maybe if it was more of a dry, winter with a bit of snow. Our winters are damp and wet. A lot of my garden beds, like the one I planted, there's a video last fall where I direct sowed parsnips in the garden. And that garden bed was basically underwater and covered in ice, like a little hockey rink, all winter long. All winter, right? Amazingly, those parsnips are growing now, even though they were basically underwater and frozen in ice for months. They're actually growing right now. Anyway, not everything likes that. Right? Some varieties of plant or bulb or whatever just can't take that sort of low oxygen, can't take being wet and frozen like that to that extent, right? So I don't know. I don't know if that's what it was or if there was some pathogen in them. I have no idea. But in the spring, when they started to grow, I got nervous and I just pulled them all out and threw them all out. And honestly, I've made I'm not going to plant garlic in that garden for a while, because I just don't want to introduce, if anything got introduced to that bit of soil, I'm just going to leave that garden out of the garlic equation for a while. So that's number one. It's something I tried. It seemed to kind of work, but I got nervous and I got rid of them all. So number two, about the toxicity of Chinese garlic. I did a little bit of looking around this morning and trying to find a recognized news source, or more importantly, I was trying to find a peer-reviewed academic article or something out of a university, published out of a university, speaking, or maybe a government report from my own government, Canadian government, or from another, reasonably legitimate government, speaking to the toxicity of Chinese garlic. I couldn't find anything. Now, I spent about 15 minutes just looking online. I found lots of people's websites, lots of blogs, lots of vlogs, lots of Facebook posts, lots of YouTube videos. Found lots of that kind of information talking about Chinese garlic being toxic. I could not find something you might think to be a peer-reviewed, sort of scientifically valid piece of work on that topic. I'm not saying it isn't true. I'm just saying I couldn't find anything. So I don't know to what extent it may be the case that in the conditions under which they're grown, they treat the soil with toxins. It may be the case that the way they treat that bulb to clean it and to package it up for marketing and to preserve it, they treat it with toxic substances. Right? All of that may be the case. But I couldn't find anything speaking to the actual garlic, the stuff that's inside there, being toxic. I'm not saying it isn't. Don't everybody flip out here. I don't, at this point, I don't know to the extent to which that's the case, right? Even all of that being said, if it's something that maybe you could get to grow where you are, there's the parent and then there's the child, right? The garlic that grows in your soil would be growing and getting its, nutrition and everything like that from your conditions. So it's going to, let's say it was some degree of toxic, the actual bulb. The new thing that comes out of that is going to be fundamentally less toxic. And if you save one of those cloves, you're basically out of the toxic business. Even if it was toxic, it's not going to be anywhere near. Let's say it's some level of toxic. And even then, when we say toxic, there's different levels of toxins. I mean, I went out with some friends last night and I drank, 4 beers, which is toxic. It's got alcohol in it, and alcohol can kill you, right? And there's other stuff in there. You have a liver and you have a kidneys, and you've got these organs in your body that literally detoxify everything that goes in your face, right? That's because there's a lot of toxins that go in your body, and your body can handle a lot of different kinds of toxins. And there's a level, right? It's not the poison, it's the doses, right? How toxic are they? That's another question, right? So I'm not trying to be pro or anti or anything like that. I'm just coming at this from someone trying to employ a bit of a scientific method into the inquiry, right? How does that affect the new bulbs? Number one, I'm not exactly sure how toxic they are at all. And number two, however toxic they are, the new things are going to be less toxic, right? And the ones after that are going to be even less toxic, right? The main reason you might not want to plant them, and I actually read an article in the CBC about this, was they were speaking to, even though they're treated with all kinds of different things, the risk of them bringing various kinds of pathogens into the ecosystem here, and those things being transmitted to other garlic in the commercial garlic business. And that's why it's recommended that you only buy certified seed gardening. Again, I don't know to what extent that's the case, but I do know that I became nervous when they started growing, and I dug them all up and threw them out, which doesn't prove anything, but I don't, your own peace of mind and your own, I'm a sort of curious, experimental, sort of adventurous type, but there's something to be said for preserving your own peace of mind. And, I became very concerned that I'd introduced something that was gonna, there's certain kind of pathogens that affect garlic, like white rot, where basically once that gets in your soil, you don't get to grow garlic anymore. It's over for you. Or there's an incredible amount of steps you have to take to get that pathogen out of your soil, because it's just so tenacious, and it can go years without having garlic to propagate itself. So I think your peace of mind is worth a couple extra bucks when you're buying your seed. But I think this question comes from this general idea of I have to have organic seeds and I have to have this kind of seed, and that general idea of the purity of the seed. I don't subscribe to that general idea. Whatever the seed was, we were talking about kale or tomatoes or whatever the seed's conditions, whatever conditions that plant that produced those seeds grew under, I don't think it has much of an effect on the plant you're growing in your conditions in your soil with your inputs, right? I mean, that's what's going to affect the thing you're getting. And even then, there's only so much a plant can take up through its roots, right? It's not going to take the plant doesn't take in things like you, right? When you're absorbing nutrients, and you grab a banana and you peel it and you stick the banana in your face and it goes in your body, right? The whole thing goes in you, and your body takes what it needs and the rest goes out. Plants take up things through these, their roots. It's a totally different way of taking things up. And yes, they can take certain amounts of toxins. It depends on the toxin, right? It depends on the toxin, its chemical components, and whether those chemical components are the sort of things that those roots will take up, right? And so there's a lot of misinformation about this and a lot of fear about this sort of thing. And I think it's worth taking a sort of a scientific approach to it and trying to find doing as much reading as you can and informing yourself on it, and just being careful. But if you're worried, don't do it. It's something I tried, and this is a good follow-up to that video. I have talked about it previously before, but in my mind, I did that video from the point of view of a person trying to save money. And I try to, tap into, that's very much my mentality, because they're just so much cheaper to buy than seed garlic. But I've come kind of full circle on that, because it's a question of, there's the savings of getting the cheap Chinese garlic, but then there's the risk associated with it. How real is the risk? I wasn't concerned at all about the things I was growing being toxic, because they're growing in my soil under my conditions and whatever. Number one, I wasn't sure about the toxicity of the garlic to start with, but even if it was toxic to some extent, and then there's a question of how much, whatever I was going to grow was going to be less toxic. So I wasn't worried about that. But what I became increasingly worried about was introducing some sort of soil-borne pathogen into my soil and just ruining my ability to grow garlic, because I like to grow like 200 or more garlic a year, and that would be really bad. So your peace of mind's worth a couple extra bucks, I think. Last question is from Linda, and she says, and this is a good one to end on actually, I'm still trying to find ways to keep the deer away from my flowers. My veggies are now all caged, but I don't want to put fences around my flowers. And nor should you. That's not, flowers are aesthetic. There's something you grow for beauty and that sort of thing. And cages aren't very beautiful. So my advice, if you're living somewhere where there's wildlife, and I'm in the exact same situation. I've got rabbits, I've got deer, I've got porcupines. And all of those things, there's lots of different kinds of flowers they will eat. I used to live in a more suburban type place, and I had beautiful hostas. I had this variety of hosta called mammoth hosta. It grew like 6 feet wide. The leaves were like 2 feet wide. It was just a phenomenally huge plant. And my wife, we just loved these plants. We had them right in the front of our house. These huge hostas. And we loved having hostas around our property. Then we moved here, where we've got all this wildlife all over the place. And we planted a whole bunch of hostas, and they ate them. And we tried this variety of hosta and that variety of hosta. And because you'd have like one kind, like you'd have what we noticed that the variegated hosta were less likely to be eaten than the solid color hosta. So we got rid of all the solid colored hosta and planted variegated ones. Well, then they just started eating those. They just liked, it would be like if you had 2 kinds of lettuce and you liked one more than the other. You'd eat the one you like, but if there was only one kind, you'd eat that. So it did, it was just, where am I going with all of this? You're not going to get rid of all the wildlife, at least I hope you don't. Or even if you wanted to, I don't think you could probably pull that off, because, they're everywhere. So you're going to, my advice would be to adapt your preferences in terms of plant varieties to things that are just yucky. By yucky, I mean from a deer, as a food, right? Things deer don't want to eat. Do some research. I don't do a veg on my angle, my podcast and all that. It's all about growing food. So I'm not really an expert on that. I'd just be reading something someone else said. But there's plenty of. Just Google something like deer-proof flowers deer don't like, ornamentals deer don't like, do those sorts of searches on Google and, read a number of different articles on it and find the ones, the varieties that are basically common to each one, right? If 10 different people are saying, I find, so I'll give you an example, and, I guess I'll preface this by saying, I grow ornamentals around my property to just make my house look nice enough to look nice. So you walk by my house, you say, yeah, that guy cares about his property. He mows his lawn, he has a nice little flower garden in the front, maintains the property value of the house, it keeps the neighbors happy. Personally, between you and me and a lamppost, I hate mowing my lawn, I hate having a lawn. I don't really care that much about flowers. So all the ornamentals I have around the property are perennials, so Basically, they're there and they just come back every year, and I just reapply the mulch every other year. And they take care of themselves. And the majority of what I've got growing around the property is different kinds of daylilies, because I find deer leave daylilies alone. I don't know why. The odd one might get a bite here or there. When the first shoots come out, you'll always see the odd one bitten off, because things are looks good, looks like a new shoot of something nice. So I think a lot of things will come along and take a bite, and oh yeah, that's awful, you know, and they don't come back, right? So, and people can disagree with me, and I'd be interested to get your comments if you're having a problem with that. But I don't find daylilies to be, put it another way, I find them to be deer-proof. I find them to be rabbit-proof for the most part. They seem to leave them alone, whereas hostas, they just go to town. And there's lots of other things you can plant that are just basically not food from a herbivore's point of view. They're more like a poison to them. They don't like it, they don't taste right, maybe it feels wrong in their mouth, whatever. So I would look into those kinds of varieties and learn to like those things. Or move. Right? It's probably a lot easier just to plant different kinds of, and you can look at it as an opportunity to learn about new kinds of flowers and develop a different sort of aesthetic on your property. For me, that's way easier than like spraying cat urine on them or putting, red pepper all over the. What a waste of time. Like, just grow something they don't like to eat and they'll leave it alone. And then there's just the only variable in that equation is you. Do you like that thing? But there's so many things to choose from. Just do a bit of research and go to a garden center and give that a try. There's a lot of things all the ornamentals I have, they seem to leave those things alone. So maybe I'll do a video on that. I'll walk around. That's probably nothing's growing right now. I mean, my daylilies haven't even broken the surface of the soil yet. Nothing's happening at all. And other parts, the place where my kids go after school, which is 10 minutes from here, daylilies are about 2-3 inches high. And mine have not even begun to grow. That's just how much different this little microclimate is from 10 minutes away. Isn't that fascinating? And I get lots of sun. It's not for lack of sun, right? I get full sun here because the trees aren't. There's no trees. I mean, there's plenty of trees, but where my gardens are, there's wonderful sun. It's still cold. Anyway, hope that answers your question, Linda, and I hope that answered all of your questions. I hope that was a useful Q&A session for you guys. I want to appreciate, thank you for watching and staying with me, and be patient. I will be out doing videos in the garden soon, not for lack of wanting. I got lots of great ideas. I just can't really get out there given the conditions. I am working on a video that's sort of a compilation video of other videos I've done on the topic of building gardens. Like, you've got no garden at all and you want to build a garden. Lots of people ask me questions about that, so I took some old footage and I'm going to sort of narrate it, and it's all sort of sped up. So I think it's only going to be 10 minutes long. It's kind of a tedious video to make. That's something I've been working on over the course of this week. I plan to have it up tomorrow. That's Sunday, April 28th. That's the plan. Right, so stay tuned for that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, and if you did, please like, share, subscribe, click that bell and all that sort of stuff. And until next time, get out there, get at it. If it's not raining too bad, have fun in your garden. Thanks for watching.